We have this on the line, one of our attorneys, Ray Hacke. He heads up our San Francisco Bay Area office to talk about an atrocity that was taking place in China. Now, we know there's lots of Christians being persecuted throughout the world, particularly in the Middle East and a lot of Islamic countries, Muslim countries in particular. But it's also taking place in places like communist China. We hear about how the church is flourishing. Well, now the Chinese government is really pouncing on Christians and churches and arresting Christians, and it's not getting a lot of media coverage. We know that President Trump has stepped up with regard to the Middle East and said, "Look, the UN, you're not helping Christians; they're being persecuted." And he's going around that and actually directly trying to help Christians being persecuted, which I salute. But it's also happening in places like China, and we at Pacific Justice Institute are doing something about it. Ray, tell me about what was taking place and what we at Pacific Justice are doing about it to help people like this gentleman who is being persecuted.
Well, Pacific Justice Institute is helping immigrants from countries like China by helping them obtain asylum on religious grounds. Basically, U.S. immigration law recognizes that people come here fleeing religious persecution, and so if we can, so basically we're looking for individuals who have come here on that basis, and we've helped more than one. We've helped somebody from Bangladesh, we've helped somebody from Egypt, in this particular case, we assisted somebody from China.
So, Ray, what specifically was this man going through to seek religious asylum here in the United States? It wasn't just he was uncomfortable. There were some real threats that he has to show in order to be able to seek religious asylum here in this country, right?
Right. Well, basically the key issue is that he had to practice his religion in secret. If he didn't practice his religion, if he practiced it openly like he could here, in China, he would have been rounded up and put in prison, which he was. They also fined him roughly the equivalent of $10,000, which is like the equivalent of a year's or a third of a year's salary. So it really cut into his finances deeply.
Well, I mean, China, let me just say, in China, $10,000 fine is like a $100,000 fine here, I'm sure, or at least in many parts of China where there's lots of poverty. And he was fined not for a crime per se. He was fined for the fact that he was openly practicing his faith. What exactly do we know was taking place? The fact he has to, you can have religious freedom so long as you keep your faith secret. I mean, I do know some politicians in this country that have come very close, I think, to espousing that. But tell us what was actually taking place with this gentleman.
Well, it had to do with, he got caught in a roundup. He got caught basically practicing his in a church that was not state approved, that was kind of underground, meeting in secret. And because of that, the government chose to punish him.
Wow. So they're engaging in rounding up, because I know a lot of these, they're called home churches or the underground churches. And the reason they have underground churches is because those churches that are state approved have to only say things from the pulpit that are approved by the government, that applaud the government, that are very wishy-washy, like I was going to say like some of our churches today, but I won't go down that road. But the fact is, that is actually the only way you can have a legal church in China is if you have one that is pro-communist government friendly and says what the government wants. So if you want to be a part of a real church that is living and breathing the gospel and really living their faith, then people like that are part of these underground churches, these small home churches. And now we're seeing these arrests taking place, these roundups. He was one of those caught in a home praying, worshiping the Lord, reading scripture, and others were rounded up as well. And this is now happening at a very major clip. We're seeing this happening more and more. And he was fined. How did he get out of China?
Well, he found a way to get out of the country and come to the United States. I think once he got rounded up, he just decided that he couldn't stay there anymore. It was just going to be too dangerous for him, as well as too dangerous for his family, people and other believers. Because a lot of times, when they go after one, they want one believer to rat out all the others and give them up, and he wouldn't do it.
Right. So they wanted not only him, they wanted his family, his loved one, his relatives, everyone that he knew or was associated with that were followers of Christ. And so he managed to make it to the United States, and he was seeking religious asylum. And then what happened? How did we help him?
Well, he was initially helped out by another firm that took his case to all the way to the 10th Circuit, and the 10th Circuit decided that having to practice his religion in secret didn't rise to the level of persecution. And so what we did in that case, when he appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court, we filed what's called an amicus brief, a friend of the court brief, on his behalf, basically stating that, because he has to practice in secret, that very much does rise to the level of persecution.
So let me just get this right. So Ray, let me just set this straight. So the 10th Circuit said that the fact that someone has to practice their faith in secret is not sufficient grounds to seek religious asylum here in the United States.
I know, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, yeah, and that's why we at Pacific Justice Institute stepped in and filed that friend of the court brief. So what happened next after this 10th Circuit decision?
Well, the Supreme Court, I guess, one of the things about the Supreme Court is that they get a lot of demands for cases or a lot of requests for cases to be heard.
Right.
And, basically, this particular client was kind of caught waiting. He couldn't necessarily wait for the whole process to be seen through. And so ultimately, one of his other lawyers, I think, asked the Supreme Court to remand it to the Board of Immigration Appeals. And the Board of Immigration Appeals, which is the highest appellate court for immigration law, they granted him asylum.
Yeah, and as I understand, Attorney General Sessions was supportive of the position of this gentleman, and weighed in on this as well. Correct?
Yes. In fact, he's issued a whole memo concerning religious freedom and how and its applications in the United States. I mean, it's not just in the context of immigration law; it's in the context of employment, as well as other things. So, I mean, Jeff Sessions is a very big supporter of religious freedom, and
yes.
So it was definitely good to have, the highest attorney in our country on our side.
Yes, and that was a very much a change in direction, if you will, for the U.S. Department of Justice, which has often been, I think, very hostile and non-accommodating of people of faith, particularly Christians, seeking asylum because of religious persecution. This is definitely a breath of fresh air. I know we at Pacific Justice Institute are very appreciative of it, and I'm really glad that we stepped in when we did to file our friend of the court brief on behalf of this gentleman. It's a wonderful watershed. It's something that we at Pacific Justice will be using in the future to protect many others in this situation. Ray, thank you again for your work at the Pacific Justice Institute, and have a Merry Christmas.
You too.
Take care. Yeah, folks, this is a very important case, and it's just it's a step forward in helping to protect so many, particular Christians who are being persecuted throughout the world. It's our small part that we're doing here in the United States to protect those who are able to come to this country and not want to have to be sent back to certain death in another country around the world. And we're really excited about this. Once again, if you'd like to support the work of the Pacific Justice Institute with a tax-deductible gift, go to our website, pji.org, and it will be matched dollar for dollar for every dollar of support that is pledged this year in December 2017. So, folks, there you have it. It's our God-given freedoms we're talking about. Now, let's choose to keep them. I'm Brad Dacus, president of the Pacific Justice Institute. Have a great weekend.
Jingle bell, jingle bell rock. A jingle bell swing.